Thank you. How y'all doing tonight? How many Gator fans we got in here? Raise your hand if you're a Gator fan. All right, the ones who didn't raise your hand, that's who I'm speaking to. Y'all need Jesus. No, it's an honor to be here today. My dad was, talking about giving. It's better to give than receive. So I guess that's what Georgia was thinking about 20 times the last few years when they were playing us. So they did good last year, so we'll give them credit for that one. Once every 15 years, not too bad. So, but I'm honored to be here. It's a privilege. I'm very excited. I didn't even know I was going to get to be here. This is final weeks for us at University of Florida, but I finished my finals early last week, so we got to go home. It's a very rare thing, and just hanging out at the house. And Robbie said he's going to Adel, Georgia to speak, so I said I'll come with you. I'm happy to be here and, get to share a few words with y'all. But first, let me tell you a quick story about two little boys. And these little boys love playing baseball. Every day, they play baseball. I mean, love playing baseball. And one day, one of the boys gets very sick. He's very sick, and he's in the hospital, and the doctor tells him, you only got a few days to live. So his best friend came up to him, and he said, once you die and go to heaven, you have to come back and you have to let me know if there's baseball in heaven. So his buddy promised him, all right, I'm going to come back and let you know. So a few days later, he died, and then he came back, and he said, well, I got some good news and I got some bad news for you. He said, well, what's the good news? What's the good news? He said, there's baseball in heaven. He said, well, what's the bad news? The bad news is you're pitching tomorrow. But it's an honor for me to be here today. I'll just share a little bit about my life. As most of you know, I'm a quarterback for the University of Florida, and I've had a somewhat successful career since I've been at Florida. My freshman year, we were able to win the national championship, and I was able to be a big part of that. And this past season, came back as a starting quarterback and had a successful season, and won the national won the Heisman Trophy, and won a lot of other awards, and had a pretty big platform because of that. And I get interviewed a lot. And one interview I did last week, or a few weeks ago, but they were asking me, they were saying, okay, so now that you've made it, now that you're successful, how have you changed? And before I replied, I said, because I'm successful, because I won a Heisman Trophy, that makes me successful. And he went on and he was like, well, because you can go all over the country and people will recognize you, because you have an opportunity to make money playing NFL someday, or because you're famous, that's why you're successful. That's why I'm successful. Someday people will forget my name. Someday my Heisman Trophy, it will rust. Someday all 3 national championship rings, it will rust. Someday, all the records that I set on the football field will mean nothing. The reason I'm successful is because I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not because I set any records on the football field. It's not because I won a Heisman Trophy or I won a national championship. It's because I know my Maker, the God who created this universe. That's Jesus Christ. And I have a personal relationship with Him. And that is why I am successful. Because I know no matter what happens, whether I am successful in the NFL or whether I'm not, whether I'm a bust or whether I'm not, my fate is sealed. I'm going to spend eternity in heaven, and I know that. So I don't have any pressure on the football field. What I do have pressure in is letting others know. Because I have a responsibility. Because I know Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, I have a responsibility to tell others. And a little bit bigger responsibility than most people here. And that's because I got a bigger platform and more people are watching. Watching like they are with a lot of athletes today, because everybody's watching. Because in today's society, people look up to football players. And so if they say, hey, this guy I look up to, he can do it like that, he can do this, I can do that. Well, if all these other athletes are doing the wrong thing, why do you think the kids are doing the wrong thing? But if we actually had more athletes stand up for the right thing and honoring Jesus Christ, I think our youth would do it a lot more too. Because I'm blessed because I got to grow up watching a guy like Danny Werfel who could do it the right way. But some guys, unfortunately, you have to grow up watching guys who do it the wrong way. and who don't set a good example. And that's what the Fellowship of Christian Athletes is all about. In today's society, everybody is watching the athlete, in particular the football player, because we're a nation that loves football. So everybody's watching. So if we're able to influence these youth, these football players young, when they get to be superstars, how many people can they influence? It's not only changing their life, it's changing the lives that they'll impact in the future. That's why it's such a great ministry. I mean, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes does a work all over the country, including the University of Florida. You know, I have the ability to take a lot of my teammates to the FCA, and a lot of them have trusted Christ there, you know, in my past 2.5 years at the University of Florida. So it is a huge event. I mean, all over the country, they're changing lives. And it's not just changing one person's life. Maybe down the road, that person's going to be on national TV, and he's going to thank his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And then some boy somewhere hears that, and then he runs and asks somebody, who is Jesus Christ? How can I know him? That is why it's so special. That's why the Fellowship of Christian Athletes can influence so many people. Because in today's society, everybody's watching the football player. Everybody's watching. You know, when is he going to screw up? Or, you know, oh, just that's another football player getting arrested. If we had a society that grew up, who can actually make a difference, an influence, a positive influence. That's all FCA is. You know, in today's society, you know, so many people will look at the football player and they're influenced because they do the wrong thing. So many people are not just watching the football player, they're watching you. You might not think, you might not be on national TV, you might not be able to do this or do that, but there's someone watching. Maybe it's your son, maybe it's your daughter. Maybe it's a kid at school, maybe it's somebody, but there are people watching, and you don't realize that. Most people think, oh, I'm not a leader, I'm not a role model. All it takes to be a leader or a role model is someone that you can influence. And you all can influence somebody. I hate hearing that when professional athletes will be like, oh, I'm not a leader, I'm not a role model. Well, you are, you're just a bad role model. Because there are people watching. There are people looking at you and gonna do the wrong thing because you did the wrong thing. So I think that's something that we all can think about. That we're all, it doesn't take just to be an athlete to be a role model or a leader. You're all role models and you're all leaders. Whether you like it or not, because there's someone watching. And it may be 100 people, it may be one person. But you have the ability to influence that one person. And so when you stand before Jesus Christ and you give an account for your actions, and he said, well, you know, Jesus said, you had the opportunity to influence him, but you didn't. You chose not to talk to him. How bad do you think that'll weigh on your conscience? And for me, I have a big responsibility because there are a lot of people watching. And I'm very blessed because I have that opportunity to influence a lot of kids. Because I'm the starting quarterback at the University of Florida, I won a trophy called the Heisman Trophy. And I'm very blessed for that. So it's my goal, my prayer, and I hope you pray for me, to have that impact like Daniel Werfel had on me, that I can have on the youth of today's society. That they can actually look at, that you can look, you tell your kids, you can watch him because he's going to do it right. He's going to set a godly example for my kids. So that is my prayer for me. I know my brother's going to share with you, and I'm supposed to introduce him, but I just want to encourage you to get involved with FCA. Get involved with something that's going to last for eternity. Because I'm sure, like my brother will talk about, you know, it's better to have rewards in heaven than rewards on this earth. You know, all the awards that I've won, they're not going to mean anything. But the rewards I have in heaven, that's what's going to mean something. I hope I can win the Heisman in heaven. That's my goal. Because you can be competitive with your heavenly rewards. You know, so many people would think, you know, I got to make the most money, or I got to become as famous as I can. All that stuff is going to go away. What I'm competitive with is how many rewards can I get in heaven? How can I change eternity with my life? So, you know, that's how I'm going to close it. And I want to introduce my brother, who is a phenomenal speaker. He's the area director of FCA. He's my big brother, and he taught me almost all I know about football. He was a very good football player and baseball player in high school. Was a Pray-Today All-American and played college football and baseball. Very good athlete, but more importantly, he loves the Lord Jesus Christ and he serves him. And so I'll introduce my big brother, Robbie Tebow.
I called Coach Scroggins this morning, and I told him, I said, you know, I got some good news and I got some bad news. I said, you know, because we were supposed to play golf early this morning, I said, the good news is I'm going to be able to bring my dad and my brother up with me. The bad news is we might not get around to golf. And but he said, you know, he said, come on up. So the good news is you got to hear from my dad and my brother. The bad news for me is I have to follow up with those things you just heard. So, but it's an honor and a privilege to be here. FCA is such an awesome. It's such an awesome thing to be able to provide in high schools and middle schools and colleges all across the country. I'm blessed to be able to be on the staff of FCA, a part of the FCA team, if you will. It's a privilege for me because of the past, just through my blood in FCA. You know, I believe God has a plan through my life. You know, I believe He had a plan for you being here tonight. I believe He sent that plan out a long time ago for you to be here tonight. He has a plan for each one of our lives. He wants to do something special in each one of our lives. 30 years ago, about 32 years ago, my dad graduated from seminary, and he was the first FCA director in Jacksonville, Florida, 32 years ago. And it's kind of crazy when you think that God had a plan all along, that 30 years later, in 2006, He would have directed my path at 24 years old, graduating college, that I would be following the same footsteps my dad walked in the same area 30 years later. You know, I couldn't have wrote that up. I couldn't have wrote that up and said, you know, this is the plan for my life. That wasn't what I had. You know, I didn't know what was going to go on in my life. I was fresh out of college. When you're out of college, you really don't have a plan. You're kind of looking for, hey, what's out there for me? And God really did a miracle in my life, and kind of set some people in my life along my path and led me to FCA. I was involved in FCA in college at Carson Newman College. And I went on Tuesday nights and was involved in it, but I didn't really know that much about it. Since then, when I came on staff in 2006, we had an old storage. And I went to this old storage and I was cleaning some stuff out and I was moving offices. And in this old storage, I was throwing a bunch of stuff away. Just a bunch of old stuff that had collected a ton of dust. And I finally, kind of getting to the end of all this stuff, I came across a bunch of old pictures. And they were kind of extra long. I mean, they kind of folded out and they were about that long. And as I was looking at these pictures, and one of the young men that stood up here earlier said he had an opportunity to go to Black Mountain Camp in North Carolina. And well, I was looking at this picture, and it was a picture from 1976 at Black Mountain, North Carolina camp. It's the largest camp FCA does in the country. And as I was looking at this picture, I looked, and lo and behold, sitting on the very first row of about 600 young men and counselors, young athletes, was my dad. And I spotted him out. It was a little tough because back in 1976, the styles were a little bit different. And, you know, he had long, shaggy hair and big old chopped sideburns. And he had some long tube socks and some Chuck Taylors on, and, you know, the short shorts, the Larry Birds as we call them. And my dad's sitting there on that front row, and it was pretty crazy for me. See, I kind of just stopped and looked at it, stared at it for a while. And because it was just a couple months earlier, before I found that picture, but that for the first time in my life, I got a chance to go to that camp, and I got to be a counselor at Black Mountain in North Carolina. And I got to sit on those same steps, and I got to take that same picture. And this was 30 years later. And you know, I started thinking about the influence that someone has. You know, my brother talked about influence. And FCA uses the influence, the vehicle of sports, to influence kids all across this country. And as many people, many young kids, many people across the country look up to my brother and many other athletes all over the world, I started thinking about the influence that people have. The enduring influence. You know, Coach Scroggins was in Jacksonville 30 years ago, and actually my dad introduced him to FCA. And for 30 years, Coach Scroggins has been sending kids to that camp in Black Mountain. And you know, some of the money that's raised here tonight is going to be to send kids to camp this summer. You know, most decisions that are made in camp settings. And over those past 30 years, I started thinking about all the lives that have had to be impacted. All the lives, not only at the camps, but all over, you know, all over this country. Not only through FCA, but, you know, through ministry and just through influence. My brother illustrated it very well. The influence you have on others. And I started thinking about that. Just touching one person, that person may touch a million. The influence you have on him. Timmy said, you know, just one person might be watching. And that's very true. You know, my dad 30 years ago influenced coaches that right now have influenced hundreds and hundreds and thousands of kids. Later on, my dad was called to the Philippines. And we actually lived in the Philippines for 5 years. And we grew up in the Philippines. And I was the middle of 5 kids. And so we grew up for 5 years in the Philippines and moved back here. And, you know, life has been an amazing journey. But all along, I've been able to look back and know that God had a plan for my life. And, you know, God has a plan for each one of us. You know, it's not the same plan. That's the great thing. He created us different. And He created us just the way we are. And He loves us, and He has a plan for us. And you know, something that really means a lot to me. You know, my dad, you know, talked about it a little bit, but storing treasures up in heaven. And, you know, there's 4 things that are going to last. And that's God, His Word, the Bible, people, and rewards. Timmy talked about storing up treasures in heaven. And, you know, 2 years ago, when the Gators won the national championship, they also won an SEC championship. And, you know, being an older brother and kind of helping, you know, see Timmy through his high school and college days, you know, he gave me a pretty awesome gift. And it's something that means a lot to me. And he gave me the 2006 SEC championship ring. And this is the SEC championship ring from 2006. You know, there's 42 diamonds in this ring. It's a pretty sweet ring. And I only will put it on special occasions because of how much it means to me. This ring is pretty sweet. And Timmy touched on earlier, he said about storing up treasure in heaven. I know that one day this ring is going to rust. It's pretty shiny right now, and it's got all those diamonds in it, but one day those diamonds are going to fall off, and it's going to get rusty. People are going to forget about it. But I know that the one thing that I know that I want to do in my life is to have an eternal investment in other people's lives. And store up treasures in heaven. Because God, His Word, people, and rewards are the things that are going to last. People will last. We're going to last. And you're going to last in either one of 2 places, heaven or hell. You know, and that choice is yours, and it's not only the choice for you to make, but it's a decision you have to influence others. You know, just my dad talked about, we took a trip during Timmy's spring break to the Philippines. and we went for just a week. Took a week out of our time, and I remember one of the days we were in the Philippines, and we were in a jeepney, and we were driving, and we were going to a few different schools that day, and they dropped me off by myself at a school. And in the Philippines, from an early age, they're taught English. They can't speak it very well, but that's what they're taught, so they can understand it. So I got up, and I was at this school with about 500 kids, high school students. And, I got a chance to share the gospel with them and preach to them, and kind of finishing up, talking about, if today you made a decision, put your trust and your faith in Jesus Christ, and you made a decision to ask Him into your heart, and we tell them that, we promise you a home in heaven, because most of them, live a very, very poor life in the Philippines. And we told them, I told them there that day, I said, if today you made a decision to ask Jesus Christ in your heart, you'll have a home in heaven. And if I never see you in America, if you never come to America and see me, if I never come back to the Philippines and see you, if you made that decision, one day I'll see you in heaven. And I was finishing up, and I was walking out of that school, and I noticed that there's about 4 little girls, about that tall, they're pretty short in the Philippines, and I was walking out, and I kind of just waved to them, and I said, I'll see you later. And one of the little girls, without even hesitating, said, I'll see you in heaven. And that gave me chills that day, and it still does today, because the small amount of time and effort that it took me to go to the Philippines for a week and invest a week out of my time, the eternity it made for that little girl. And there are hundreds and hundreds of stories like that, but it's just a small investment. And not everybody can go and do that. But God doesn't call all of us to go. God has a plan, a different plan for each one of us. But He wants us, and He asks us to do something. Tonight, you have an opportunity to help kids go to camp. To help scholarships kids so that they might have an opportunity to hear the gospel and to make that decision. So that one day they'll have a home in heaven. Growing up, once we moved back from the Philippines, we bought, my parents got a big farm, kind of like out here, a lot of land and some pasture. We kind of grew up with a bunch of cows and some horses and chickens and dogs and a big old garden. And so growing up, being the oldest boy in the family, when my dad would leave for the Philippines, he'd be gone for 3 weeks. And when he would leave, he would take me outside, and he would say, we would go over a list of everything that had to be done while he was gone. And, he would say, he would leave, and he'd say, Robbie, you're the man of the house. And so, when he left, I had to make sure none of the cows got through the fence. I had to make sure the animals were fed, none of the dogs ate the chickens, and everything was all right, because I knew in 3 weeks' time, my dad was going to come home, and he was going to check everything out. And so one of the things that I looked forward to every time we would go pick my dad from the airport, and every time I knew he was going to look through everything, and he was going to come back, and he was going to look through everything, and if everything checked out, he was going to say, great job, Robbie, while I was gone. That a boy. You did a great job while I was gone. And I used to, when he would be gone, I used to do things just so I could hear that a boy, Robbie, that a boy. I wanted to make sure that while he was gone, I took care of my responsibility. And what I think about in my life now, and in our life, one day, I'm going to stand in front of my God. And I want my God to say, well done, Robbie, that a boy. Great job while I was gone. You did a great job with the responsibility that I gave you. That a boy. That a boy, Robbie. I want to hear that one day. that inspires me to do with what I have just a little bit, just a little investment of my time and my efforts can store up those treasures in heaven. What inspires you? What's God's plan for you? What kind of investments are you going to make? You know, in closing, there's a little girl in Jacksonville. She's at the Children's Memorial Hospital in Jacksonville. And she's 12 years old. And ever since she was about 5 years old, she's had different forms of cancer. And she only has probably a few days, if not weeks, to live. And actually, we're going to visit her tomorrow. And her name is Katie Carter. And Katie Carter was born in 1996, and inevitably she'll die in 2008. And, you know, she looks up to Timmy, and she's got posters all over the hospital wall, and, you know, that's her idol, is Timmy. And she doesn't have much time to go, but she knows that Timmy's going to come visit her. And that kind of gives her just a little bit of hope, just a little bit of something to cling on to. But you know what? In a few weeks, in a few days, little Katie Carter is going to be buried. And it's going to say on her tombstone, it's going to say Katie Carter, and it's going to say 1996, and it's going to have a dash. And it's going to say 2008. Little Katie Carter didn't get to do much with her 12 years on this earth. One day, my tombstone is going to say 1981, and it's going to have a dash. And then the next part has a question mark right now, but that dash represents what I've done with my life. And I've had more opportunity than what little Katie Carter has. And I want my dash to represent Jesus Christ and what I've done for Him. Little Katie didn't have much time to do very much with that dash. And some of us, we've had a lot of time, but we still have time left. My challenge and my question to you tonight is, what are you going to do with your dash? What kind of eternal investments are you going to make? Thank you so much.